located over 2,200 miles off the coast of Chile, one of the most isolated places in the world. We have Easter Island, where the mainstream history tells us that the island has over 1,000 stone-carved massive heads, averaging 13 feet in height, that we are told were probably carved to commemorate important ancestors from around 1,000 years ago. Probably. Maybe. And I probably have some questions, and we're probably gonna shred this narrative. When self-proclaimed experts, people that were not there, just like you and me, these experts disagree with each other on when the island inhabitants first reached the island, while many in the research community think that they arrived in the year 800, 1,200 years ago. But the 2007 people think that they arrived in the year 1,200, 800 years ago, when those people in the 800s were, of course, master stone carvers out in the middle of the ocean, just to show appreciation to their ancestors, which we all do today, of course. So then the mainstream just skips hundreds of years ahead to the year 1722, leaving out a 900 to 500 year timeline gap, because nothing important happened for 900 years. And we have this fully documented. No. When 1722 hits, the Europeans arrive, of course, and find these 2,000 to 3,000 people living in the middle of the ocean. And this is when they basically kill them all and rewrite the mainstream history to what we read today. In my opinion, this 1722 date that we are given was more realistically closer to this 1877 date down here at the bottom, because literally 11 years later, in 1888, Chile annexed Easter Island by forcible acquisition over one's territory. So we have some very trustworthy things happening here. Lots of nice meetings, some great discussions, some murder, and some land takeovers. We have a group of people that now have complete and total control of the narrative. That seemed like a great bunch. A group that we should fully trust and go the extra mile for. And giving this answer would give you an A on your college social studies exam. It would also be ridiculous in the real world when we can clearly see that they have 100% drilled a lie regarding Easter Island into our heads since 1888. And this is when we take it up a notch. When in 2020 until 2022, for 2 years, they shut this place down to the public. Nobody could go in there for 2 years. And then from August to October, just 2 months after the island was reopened to the public, a forest fire burned nearly 148 acres of the island, causing irreparable damage to the stone statues, where a random arson is suspected, but will forever be a mystery. 2 months after they opened it back up, some random individual lights the whole island on fire. Really? And we have no idea who did this? What are the odds of that? Also, how much of this place is really something that can be ignited? These stone structures that are most likely bigger than we can see and just buried under the ground. And this fire doesn't make any sense at all when thinking logically, because they tell us that the fire was in an area where several hundred of these stone structures were, as well as the stone quarry, where the stone used to carve the sculptures is extracted, lighting a bunch of stone on fire. Are we all following what is being said here? They're telling us that this random individual somehow ignited a bunch of stone. Do you understand how hard this would be? To go to this island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and light the place on fire and get away with it. And is anybody surprised that there is now a fire narrative attached to these incredible statues? Yet another fire. And we know that stone is one of the worst options to throw into your bonfire. Have any of us successfully started a fire using just stone, grass, and dirt? There really aren't any trees on this island. In fact, I don't see one. It's basically grass and stone. So they destroy the main site, where these massive stone structures came from. And then we can't forget that these people from the 800s were also able to carry these 1,000 replicas that weigh over 10 metric tons right on over to their ultimate resting place. Oh, did I say replicas? Do I think that this was an island filled with giants that were possibly killed off in 1888? Where we have clear evidence of the mud flood, even on a random island in the middle of the ocean, where it seems like a layer of dirt was thrown over the top of the entire map that we live on. Like the oceans rose up and brought mud with it, with the waters then going back down, but leaving the mud behind. And we have seen this all over, including in our Boots on the Ground playlist. Speaking of maps, are you ready to see this map that I found? A map from the Chilean government in 1870, with additions and corrections 16 years later, when we all know about Tartaria at this point. A land that none of us were taught about in our mainstream history classes growing up. Right here on Easter Island, right next to this bay, we have Tatara. Has there ever been a bigger time in history that we have wanted to zoom in on a location on Google Earth and see what is there? I threw these two maps over the top of each other to line up the exact location for us. I lined up this bottom corner, this circular spot with each other, and then went from there. And it looks like we have located Tatara Easter Island, and it's time to have some fun, where we have just located the crowned statues and two massive mounds, where we all know about the mounds from our St. Louis episodes, where we have found the Monk's Mound that has a temple 2 feet under the dirt. Could these be massive temples under the grass, located in Tatara Easter Island, next to the line of crowned statues? If I was allowed to dig for treasure anywhere in the world, I think I know where I would go. And it's also so clear and obvious that since 1888, the mainstream history is 100% lying to us, manipulating us with false stories, because we all know and can see the original map from the 1800s. It says Tatara, and now, of course, it's no longer named that. In fact, they changed the names of every single one of these locations in the last 150 years. What was wrong with the original names? Well, they gave away too many clues. Where we also have Matu Tantara, and we know that this is where Tatara Easter Island is located. We just saw this spot on Google Earth, 150 years later. Let the mainstream narrative get their hands on a story, and now it's called Anakenna Beach. So we have proof of history being rewritten in the last 150 years. Total manipulation, where they tell us that this was the first replica to be raised back into place by using those incredible wooden levers in 1955. Back into place. What do you think they did with possibly the most important part of Easter Island before 1955, where they have 7 of these replicas and 2 of which have deteriorated? Or in other words, and in my opinion, 2 have been destroyed. It's an unusual location for Easter Island, where it is one of 2 locations where there is a sandy beach. This is a clear indication that this location of Tatara was the main location of the island, a port, where these individuals were able to come and go to and from the island. The rest of the island is a rocky coastline, meaning that these were most likely man-made beaches. And this sentence is a clue for us to dig deeper, where they say that islanders read from these Rongorongo boards, where we have located possibly something incredible. These were seized, and most of these tablets were lost or destroyed in the 1860s. Unbelievable. And at this point, the mainstream narrative is on the ropes. This is so in your face that we have been manipulated and completely lied to. Our mainstream history is 100% fabricated and controlled, destroying the writings in the 1860s, when at the exact same time, we are told that in the 1860s, this was when the population of Easter Island was depleted, and the Chilean government annexed the island 20 years later. Incredible, where we get a tale of their destruction. And remember, this story is most likely complete nonsense, but it says in 1868 that the Bishop of Tahiti was given the wooden boards covered in this hieroglyphic writing, and none of the natives were capable of translating the writing. Well, they weren't capable because they were all dead from the Europeans, so of course they couldn't translate anything. And this is when we're told that they say they had hundreds of tablets 4 years prior and now couldn't find them, and the locals were dead, so they burned them as firewood. Could you even imagine the information that was destroyed and hidden from us in just the last 150 years. From the writings that we do have, they prove that the wood that had writings on it that were supposedly found at Easter Island weren't originally from Easter Island. In 2007, Catherine Orliac, through examination, proved that the wood wasn't from native land. It wasn't from Easter Island, showing that the wood was actually from South Africa, yellow wood, and therefore that the wood had arrived with Western contact. And this means, in my opinion, that these are just fakes. They are literally a bunch of children's scribbles to try and trick us into thinking that they were primitive cavemen that accidentally made some massive stone carvings and then go over in the corner and draw like a 2-year-old. When I guarantee you that the originals that were burned in yet another fire were elaborate and gave away a history, a lot of knowledge that isn't being shared with us or with our future generations. I think that in the future, whenever you are told this tale of hieroglyphs from an ancient civilization that look like they drew it with their left hand and with their eyes closed and blindfolded, you should be very careful believing that as factual information. Being able to carve massive stone structures perfectly over and over, but they can't draw it on a piece of paper. We all understand in architecture, before a building is created, even a small house, before it's here physically, we have to first draw it up. If you can't draw, the building or the house isn't going to turn out any better. Drawing like this and then knocking out 1,000 of these is not logical thinking. That does not add up. So we know at this point that the real Rongorongo texts, the true ones, are not being shown to us. And I bet they didn't actually burn them in a fire. I bet you they still have them. Oh, and one more thing about the 1860s. After they wiped these people out, they took one of these replicas back to London, where it has been described as a masterpiece. Yet they supposedly draw like 2-year-olds, where the name was given to it by the British crew that took it, translating to stolen friend. Incredible. And it's time for possibly the best part, and to tie this whole thing together. Here we go. I have located an article from the 1964 Oregon State Daily Barometer, uncovering some information that should make this episode one to remember, where we know that the Tartarian Empire was located in Central Asia. And we also see this on many maps, where we also know that Easter Island holds possibly the most important part of the island, named Tatara. And then we have this article from 1964, where it reads that Easter Island has caused worldwide disagreements over its origins of people. Some experts believe they came from Asia, which would tie them directly to Tartaria, which I normally don't agree with what the self-proclaimed experts have to say. But the article goes on to give us a second option of where these people came from, where the others claimed that South America was where they came from 1,000 years before them. And we all know which narrative was chosen to be taught to us today, and it wasn't the Tartaria connection one. Now both may be false, but one connects the story, and that's the same option that was left out of the storybooks that we are all taught today. And we're about to expose something that is 100% not shown to us in the mainstream history. A place that 99% of us have never heard of. That's in an article from over 100 years ago. That when these were first discovered, they appeared to be heads above the ground. However, after excavation, some were found to measure 40 to 50 feet long, or taller than a 4-story building. And somebody was asking the right questions in 1964. When they ask, how were these carved, transported, and erected on a secluded island without metal or trees? And I think we know now that there was a much more advanced, most likely, much bigger group of people that were here before us. And I don't believe it was that long ago. 50-foot tall giant statues, over 1,000 of them, and in my opinion, replicas. Absolutely incredible stuff. And this goes even deeper, where a 1925 article from the Courier Journal gives us a map of a massive land called Mu. Where have any of us heard or seen a land called Mu. And it says the map is showing the supposed position and extent of Mu after Hawaii and Easter Island had been separated from it, where people migrated to Mexico and over to Asia. It also goes on to say the crosses on the map are the locations of stone monumental remains of the land of Mu. Okay, so we definitely know that there was more land here. And this is about to get really interesting. When it reads, in this land of Mu, according to Colonel Churchward, this was the Garden of Eden, the spot where Adam and Eve of mankind's beginnings lived. Now it tells us that this information is coming from ancient tablets, where he and an East Indian temple custodian have succeeded in translating, and this all coming to us in 1925. So 7 years later, in 1932, we have the San Francisco Examiner also mentioning this continent of Mu, giving us another map. Now, whether we believe that this continent was real or not, this is still information. When I find something that could give us clues for the future, I am not going to withhold it from everyone. That being said, this would make a lot of sense, since there is a massive amount of space between the Americas and Asia, Australia, in the Pacific Ocean. If this land was there, I don't believe that it was 13,000 years ago like they're telling us. I would say it's much closer to our timeline, and possibly sank when the mud flood worldwide took place. And this would definitely explain why they are finding these massive stone structures and pyramids under the water, and would explain where the Mayans came from and why they have stories regarding the destruction of Mu. And in this article, it goes even deeper into this narrative, where it tells us that this colonel went to central India and met with a high priest in a temple school monastery, where the priest in the 1800s showed him some extremely ancient tablets, which had been hidden for thousands of years in the temple vaults, proving, in my opinion, that these groups of people hold the knowledge. They know our true history and are 100% hiding it from us. The mainstream history that we are all told today, in my opinion, is a totally different narrative than what really took place here. And within this same article, we are told that an American archaeologist discovered in Mexico the ruins of 3 great cities. The city was covered with a foot of earth. And at the bottom of the article, saying that it was destroyed by a flood, showing more evidence of a worldwide mud flood, like we have mentioned. And we all know about Plato and how he mentioned the land of Atlantis, an article that may give us a much clearer idea of where Atlantis really was and what it was really called. An 1899 article predating the 1925 article by 26 years from the St. Louis Globe. As we zoom in on this paragraph, we can see that it says that a doctor has spent 12 years in Yucatan studying the Maya language and digging among the ruins, where he has made some famous finds, where he says that the Mayans had the original Isis, the original Osiris, and the original Sphinx. They had a highly developed language before Sanskrit, where the Mayans lived in splendor, long before and long after that strange land, the land of Mu, which Plato has called Atlantis. We all want to know who built these massive cathedrals, right? We all want to know who had the knowledge before we were all born. We want to know why we're being told that they were built with hammers and chisels. Today, I think we take a step closer to finding out where this incredible knowledge of construction truly came from, where we are all aware of the massive continent that was completely left out of our mainstream textbooks, the land of Mu. So let's go even deeper. When we go back to this article from the Courier Journal from 1925, nearly 100 years ago, where it reads, according to the records from Colonel Churchward and the East Indian High Priest, the records state that some people were brought by flying machines to India from the land of Mu in the Pacific Ocean. The records say that Mu was the motherland of man. In Mu was the Garden of Eden, where they had cities, where they learned to build palaces of marble. They acquired the skill to quarry gigantic blocks of stone and to transport them long distances and to carve them into human faces. Like we saw in episode 60 in Easter Island, where the records say that the people of Mu navigated the air and had ships where they sailed to far distant lands with rich cargo, And now that we know all of this, I want to show a few things. First of all, this is showing that the technology of flight has been here before, where the Wright brothers story, creating the first plane in the 1800s, would be a massive lie, where they have this information stored and giving it back to us slowly, as we have discussed. Secondly, they mention in the tablets that the land of Mu was in the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean has been named the Pacific Ocean for 13,000 years? Or was the land of Mu here much closer to our timeline? Or is there more land? Not the entire continent, obviously, but are there other lands, possibly bigger than Easter Island and possibly bigger than Hawaii, left over from that cataclysmic event that are still here today and simply hidden from our maps and our flight paths, where our current day planes could simply just be flying around that area, where these hidden islands could be, hidden knowledge, where our flight paths are just circling it, the Garden of Eden, the place where humans had cities, where they learned to build palaces of marble, and learning all of the construction skills that we are all asking questions about worldwide today. We are all wondering who built these cathedrals. We all know at this point that the horse and wagon community did not hire Donkeys Incorporated in the 17 and 1800s to chisel away at some stone and marble and knock out the Cologne Cathedral. We know this. We know that they didn't hit the stone with a hammer, a little harder and with a little more precision than we do today. And their work just lasts forever, and ours doesn't. It's not about effort. There's knowledge involved here. The Gloucester Cathedral, located in England, we are told was constructed by the people of the 1100s, 900 years ago. And of course, the narrative holds a major fire in the year of 1088, because the narrative knows all about the year 1088. And this is fully documented, of course. No. The interior ceiling of the Gloucester Cathedral is incredible. And I am at the point where I believe that this knowledge to construct this way, architecture that doesn't fit into our mainstream history at all, of primitive people in huts, no power tools, and zero background on their training processes all over the world. This incredible architecture and construction in every single continent may have come from this continent of Mu, where they seem to have had communication with a higher power, where we are told that this is the Garden of Eden. And it shows through the construction. We have the physical evidence that they were able to construct the massive stone heads at Easter Island. And then we have this, Nan Madol, located on an island called Micronesia, a location that is connected to the land of Mu, connected to Hawaii, and connected to Easter Island, also located in the Pacific Ocean, a once great city of man-made stone islands. The construction of the artificial islets probably started 1,300 years ago. Probably. Maybe. When in reality, in my opinion, it wasn't 1,300 years ago and was much closer to our current timeline, where they go on to say that this was built at the exact same time as the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, where they just eyeballed it, gave it a solid educated guess. The experts really nailed these dates, where the 12th to the 13th century seems like the winner. So it's very clear that these dates are attempts to fit this place right into their timeline of thousands of years. And what is with these maps? Throwing a layer of static right over the top of this location with a perfect 90-degree angle. It's interesting to say the least. Nan Madol has confused the mainstream narrative, and they simply don't understand how to fit this place in, where this location holds construction of megalithic architecture, where the so-called experts cannot explain it, where they say little can be verified about the megalithic construction, where we already know at this point that this land was connected to the continent of Mu, where they were given the knowledge to build palaces of marble. They learned to quarry gigantic blocks of stone and learned how to transport them long distances, and also learned how to carve stone, where we are told that they built huge stone buildings. And then they show us these depictions of it in the mainstream history, like it was actually constructed in the water, like this. When we know that it was built on land, built on the continent of Mu, it wasn't originally in the water like this. In legend, we are told that the builders lifted the huge stones with the aid of a flying dragon. So we definitely have something very interesting going on here in the Pacific Ocean, where Colonel Churchward claimed that the civilization of Mu was technologically more advanced than we are today. And is this not exactly what we're saying today? A civilization that was here before us, that we are not being told about in our mainstream history classes, that was much more advanced, with so much more technology than we have today, where we are being given all of this technology back slowly after 1776, where Columbus didn't discover anything and was a fictional character in my opinion, when the previous civilization before us didn't know of less land than we do today. Instead, they knew about more land than we do today. It's a complete opposite, where Churchward goes on to say that this advanced civilization, this group in Mu, was known as the Nakals. The dates and the years are all over the place, and it's the one thing that's impossible to translate. This is in my opinion, but this is because the year 2024 is not really the true year. I think the calendar that we use today is fabricated to completely confuse us. And the further you get away from the creation date, the further you get away from the creator. I'm not entirely sure which year we are really in. And this is why it's impossible for James Churchward to know how long ago the continent of Mu was really here. I don't believe it was thousands of years ago, like I've said before. He also goes on to say the ancient civilizations of India, which would explain why these tablets would be in an Indian temple. Babylon, Persia, Egypt, and the Mayans were built by the people of Mu. And if there was one place in the world that would be hidden from our maps today, one specific location that holds all of this technology, flying crafts, marble structures, everything, who's to say that the group of people that found this location, or the remains that were at this location, and are in control today, who's to say that this group wouldn't hide this location that is the stem of all information from all of us? Is it just a coincidence that the Pacific Ocean is basically empty on our map that we are shown? And don't forget that being in control of the map is a key part of the game. What if we are playing the game with a false map? Is it possible that a part of this incredible land of Mu is still here? Is it possible that the Garden of Eden is hidden to us? Is this why we have no idea where we are, or what we're doing here, or why we're finding massive structures that make no sense in our timeline? Hiding massive continents, hiding technology, giving us a false history, giving us a false map. Is this why we are distracted with Egypt, where they tell us to look to Egypt and the pyramids, while the real location is over in the Pacific Ocean, where Churchward claimed that the ancient Egyptian sun god Ra originated with the Mu, where Ra was the word which the Nakals used for sun, as well as for their god and rulers. Now, again, this is all information that we can hold on to for the future while we go further into this research. Finding a continent that's conveniently no longer on our map, where they were able to construct massive structures, had incredible technology, and would explain the pyramids in Egypt, is something that I cannot keep to myself. Churchward had two major critics, and neither of them actually ever read the tablets that Churchward did at the Indian temple, where we have Curtis Wilgus, a historian who taught at George Washington University, where he organized and directed the Center for Latin American Affairs, and also organized the school's annual Caribbean conferences. So this guy was locked in and knew all about these tablets, where the Caribbean conference organizer guy tells everybody that Churchward's research was the strangest of fiction. It was pure imagination, based on everything that he learned over at the annual Caribbean conferences. And that's exactly how Curtis aced his college exams, by asking 0 questions and receiving 3 mainstream college history degrees, 3 of them. So we have a very open-minded individual in Curtis. Now, who is this other critic? Engineer and writer L. Sprague de Camp, where he simply dismissed the idea of the Nakal in an article in 1946. Just dismissed it. De Camp spent 10 years attending Snyder School in North Carolina, in a military-style institution where his parents were heavy-handed disciplinarians to cure him of intellectual arrogance. All right, so we have 2 critics that spent their entire life being told what to think, and they were very good at it. And those were Churchward's critics, people that were never there, People that never spent the time in India at the temple and had zero proof that Churchward was incorrect. By simply just saying that Churchward's work is insane or mythical does not prove anything. It proves that their minds are so manipulated to the point that they can't ask any questions and can't let go of the lies that they've been told. By admitting that Churchward's work is a possibility, it would mean that these two individuals would have to agree that all of their time spent learning one way of thinking and feeling like they knew more than everybody else about human history, everything that they thought was the truth, may have been a waste of time. And for some people, this is extremely difficult, and I can't fully blame them. But at the same time, they need to start asking some questions, and not towards us. We owe them nothing. We have taken a total of $0 from them. We are simply asking questions about our past. These questions should be directed towards the people, the institutions that have taken thousands of dollars from them. We are simply trying to find the truth at all costs. If a massive continent of Mu is truly out there, or even parts of it, hidden within the information that is provided, a place with marble structures and hidden technology, a hidden past, and possibly an explanation as to why these massive structures all over the world, in all of our cities, and possibly the location of the Garden of Eden. I want to know about it. Now that we know that there are basically zero critics of James Churchward's work, and we have records from 1925 that James Churchward learned more than just hidden history. He also learned, in my opinion, hidden technology from the previous civilization, where James Churchward owned over 100 patents. Now, I want to go even deeper. James was a soldier. He was stationed in India, where he became close friends with an elderly monk from a nearby temple, where these documents were in a secret archive in the temple. The priest or monk taught Churchward the language called Nakal, by which the tablets were written. And we know that according to Churchward's work, these were the people that lived in the continent of Mu. And the part that I find interesting is that the location of where James was stationed, the location of where this temple is located, is wiped out from our database. The fact that we cannot look up where he was based, hiding his location as colonel, proves to me that they want this information gone and hidden. As if the British government doesn't know or has lost the records of where they stationed one of their soldiers. He was stationed in India for decades, and this location of this temple is now hidden from us. Finding a continent in the middle of the Pacific Ocean was not a part of the plan. I believe that James Churchward messed up the mainstream narrative when he spoke to that elder. Having an advanced civilization that was here before us does not at all fit into the narrative that we created the first plane, the first train, the first car, the first phone, TV, the light bulb, and the rest. All in the 1800s. It would make sense that all of our worldwide technological information would all stem from the Garden of Eden, or in other words, the beginning place. A branch off to Egypt, India, Mexico, Asia, and the rest of the world. Having an advanced civilization that was here before us does not fit into the narrative that today we have the best construction processes. And it honestly disproves the evolution theory. It shows that we are not evolving and advancing. We are simply growing as we are allowed to grow. We are as advanced as we are allowed to be. And this is what James Churchward proved. This article clears up a lot for us. When James did not go to India with the intentions of learning any of this information, he was stationed in India and was in charge of the old priest. James was in charge of the priest. This was his role. This priest was one of the three most highly learned priests of India. Secretly stored in the archives of the temple were hundreds of clay tablets. The old rishi or priest became highly attached to James Churchward and taught him the key to the ancient alphabet. So this priest or rishi taught James this information and then showed him secret tablets. And then we actually have these massive heads at Easter Island. We actually have the structures at Nan Madol. We have physical proof that backs James Churchward's narrative up. You can physically go there and see it for yourself. So the location of this temple in India, where James was based for years, is wiped out from our knowledge. But we all know that if there is a temple out there in India with hundreds of hidden tablets, that hold incredible knowledge, then there most likely is more than one. Who else has hidden knowledge that holds our true history, just waiting for us all to find it? Nicholas J. Clayton, an 1800s master architect who is pinned to 47 buildings, mainly located in the state of Texas, that are under investigation today. 11 of the 47 buildings have been demolished, 3 more burning to the ground, including the electric pavilion that we are being told was constructed in 1882 and burned down the very next year. While he is also pinned to the Masonic Lodge building, which was also demolished, pinned to the temple, located on 816 22nd Street, which later became the Masonic Temple, with his father having the exact same name, Nicholas J. Clayton, which we have seen so many times, reoccurring names constantly, where the mainstream narrative is no longer able to hide and make flaws that nobody cares about anymore. When we are told that Clayton knocked out the St. Mary's Infirmary in Galveston, Texas in 1874, and it's demolished in 1865, knocking a building down 9 years before it was constructed. Clayton was born in 1839 and moved to the USA as a small child from Ireland. And I think this is going to show us how these people, like Clayton, were inserted into these roles, pinned as the architect of old world buildings. Clayton went into the United States Navy, where he was now planted in Galveston, Texas in the 1800s, and was destined to be a master architect in our history books, where he became one of the first professional architects in Texas. And of course, the very first architect in Texas would be the best to ever live in Texas, with 0 mistakes ever, and his buildings built to last lifetimes, knocking out the Sacred Heart Catholic Church in 1905, where in 1888, the Jesuits took over the responsibilities of the parish. Clayton was also pinned to the main building at St. Edward's University, located in Austin, Texas, where we are told that the first one was completed in 1888, the same exact year that the Jesuits took over the other Clayton Church. And they tell us that the one we see today is the second one, when they rebuilt it no problem at all in 1903 after a fire, where it gets very interesting when they tell us that they hired Clayton to design the structure. But when we go back to his works, this building is not listed, adding to the fire total that we mentioned earlier. Clayton also is said to have designed the Beach Hotel in Galveston, Texas. Construction began in 1882, and they just wrapped that thing right up in 1883. 1 year later. Not a problem in the 1800s, where it was destroyed by a mysterious fire. Just 15 years later, where the cause of the fire was never determined. A 25-minute fire in 1898, and the whole thing is gone. A mysterious fire. Yeah, okay. And apparently, the Harmony Hall is another Masonic temple that Clayton was pinned to, where we are about to turn this thing up a notch. The Masonic temple had its cornerstone laid in 1882, after they just upgraded their chisels over at Donkeys Incorporated Home Depot. This building was done in 2 years by Clayton and his horse and wagon team. Completed in 1884. All of this is done before the power tool was even invented in 1895. So we all know who gets the old world building. Taken over in 1884 with Gothic detail engrafted on classic forms in the Italian Renaissance. It was a masterpiece, where they tell us that the building was later destroyed by a fire in 1928. Just take a look at the building and tell me if this is something that looks like it would be built in 2 years today in 2024. I mean, I would say it's possible if we had the very best tools, the most incredible equipment, the best workers that were fully trained, a shipping company that was right on time, and all the rest. But for us to believe that this took 24 months in 1884 before the power tool and then randomly burns down is, in my opinion, is complete nonsense. Back then, many of the Masons worked downtown, and even as the building burned, they saved the books, said Abby Hughes, a master mason and member of the Scottish Rite for 56 years. They moved almost everything, even the grandfather clock, where we are told this building also held an elaborate Italian marble staircase, and they saved that as well. I'm gonna ask you guys, does this sound like a fire? Or does this sound like a demolition after they removed everything? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do we all trust what Master Abby has to say? Her story seems a little odd if you ask me. When they go on to say, during this fire that burned down the incredible building, with the flames ripping through it, they were able to remove piece by piece this Italian marble staircase. They cleaned it up and gave it a brand new home, making it the centerpiece for the current cathedral. And this was an acceptable narrative for nearly 100 years, until now, where we all know, after everything we've seen to this point, we know that this is complete nonsense and was a destruction process on a building that they did not build. They found it, they repurposed it, and they took all the valuable books and items out of it that belonged to the previous civilization and destroyed the building. What else they pinned to this Clayton guy? Ball High School in Galveston, Texas, where Ball High tells us that in 1884, Ball High became the second ever high school in the state of Texas. And this was their high school. I mean, do I even have to say anything? Does it get any more incredible than that? This was built in the 1800s as a high school. The cornerstone is said to have been laid in February of 1884. That same year that Clayton wrapped up this building that had a demon fire that licked its way through the rich furnishings, gutted the building, and cracked the walls, sending debris flying into the streets, where thousands of people watched. Another quote from Abby Hughes, the master mason of the Scottish Rite for 56 years. When I'm sure nobody was watching them do anything, Ball High started its construction in 1884 and wrapped it right up in 1886. 2 years, done. So Clayton was just knocking these things out, no problem at all. And could you imagine him today, just ripping through these things in our towns today? And could you imagine if this guy actually had power tools? What kind of buildings would he be building today? I mean, I think he would be the Picasso of our time. Just imagine if Clayton had one cordless drill. Imagine him having a saw or a shipping company that had the trucks that we have today. I think this building would have gotten done in like a week. Why do we not have statues of this Clayton guy? We would have a total of 0 houses with vinyl siding. I can guarantee you that. There's no way Clayton would have allowed that. Our town halls, our high schools, they would have been palaces. And we know that there was a much more advanced previous civilization that is definitely being hidden from our timeline. A civilization that had incredible knowledge, had proper training, had all the tools, and understood how to get these buildings done all over the world. And they did not do it while riding around like a cowboy, while in their wagon. When we are told that in 1955, this building just wasn't cutting it anymore, and they felt like they needed to upgrade it, where according to GalvestonMonthly.com, they say that this was the oldest public school in Texas. They say there is a letter that was beneath the cornerstone, buried in a time capsule that contained the items related to the school's incarnation. And I would love to know what they found in 1955 in that time capsule. And here we're gonna see how incredibly well built these old world buildings really were. In 1900, a Category 4 hurricane devastated this location, killing around 8,000 people, which remains the worst weather-related disaster in US history in terms of loss of life. Yet, a year later, in 1901, this school was back in service, as if nothing happened. In 1954, they had a new school built, as we have mentioned. And soon after, they tore down the structure. And since they just can't leave it out of the story, of course, they had built a new building, which was later sold to the United Fire and Casualty Company, located on the exact same site. Now, we were also given the synagogue in Texas that has incredible architecture and a very strange past, where we are told that this is one of the oldest standing synagogues in Texas. And all of these buildings that we've mentioned are all attached to the same exact character, Nicholas Clayton. The synagogue was supposedly designed by local architect Fred Stewart, designed and built in the same year of 1870. And then they sell it the same year that Ball High School was demolished in 1955. And they sold it to the Masonic Lodge, with this building, of course, also surviving the 1900s Category 4 hurricane. No problem at all. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I'm shocked they didn't just name this town of Galveston the town of Clayton, because he's pinned to everything here. He's pinned to the temples, he's pinned to the high schools, the courthouses, where he knocked out the town's 4th courthouse, 3-story stone structure, completed in 1892, when it just wasn't cutting it anymore. And they knocked it down to build a new one 6 years later in 1898. And I'll tell you what, Galveston, your historical narrative is one of the sketchiest narratives that I've ever heard. The first courthouse was done in 1838, 186 years ago, built by nobody. And what happened to it? They tell us nothing. We're just supposed to believe them. And guess what? A brand new one is on the way. In 1857, it's here. Who built that one? It will forever be a mystery, just the way the mainstream narrative likes it. Second courthouse, get out of the way. A third one is coming in, a 3-story stone structure, exactly like the 4th one. This one is designed by Eugene Thomas Heiner in 1882. And this one was, of course, not up to the 1800 standards, a time period where we had nothing better to do besides build 3-story stone palaces and then knock them down 10 years later, only to build a brand new 3-story stone structure in 1892 and just get rid of that one 6 years later, where that one is partially destroyed by the 1900s hurricane. And the 6th and present courthouse was completed, where this gets strange. The current building was built in 2006. It says that according to multiple sources, but the main source leaves out this other building, where they say that another building was built in 1966, which we aren't being told about in the official narrative. So this is the current day courthouse, and it's actually the 7th courthouse on this site. We are all understanding that they were not building massive courthouses and knocking them down over and over and over. And we've shown this many times throughout all of the episodes. The first courthouse was a masterpiece from the old world, where the first courthouse is always a masterpiece from the old world. And they replace it with this thing and give us these insane stories where they knock down 10 buildings and only need them for a few years, where I have gone even deeper and found that there were actually 7 courthouses, not 6. With this box being the replacement in 1966, our modern construction in the last 60 years is pathetic. This box, the one that they tell us, was highly regarded for its modern architecture. The governor proclaimed it the most beautiful courthouse in the state of Texas. This guy must have been blind as a bat. This box, built in the architecture style called your basic box style, he called that a modern masterpiece of the 20th century. And that replaced this courthouse. And we all understand that this was the original courthouse, where in any of their 7 courthouses, this story would not hold up, where they have zero information on the 1838, 1856, 1875, or 1892 courthouses. They don't even have a fake drawing to show us. Nothing. Because this 1898 building was built long before 1898 and long before 1838. This building was here and built by the previous civilization that once lived in this location. They can't just say they had 7 courthouses and give the public zero information about them. That is nonsense. It's not true. And this nonsense may have worked for a century, but it does not work anymore. And now we have possibly the most incredible building that is pinned to Clayton's name. The Ashbel Smith Building, also located in Galveston, Texas, and it still stands here today. This is the oldest medical school building west of the Mississippi River, according to the mainstream narrative, where we have photos before 1900, and we have nothing. We have dirt roads, and then we have this palace. And then we have a photo from September in 1900, right after the hurricane. And the building held up pretty well, where only the roof took some damage. But the rest of the building looks fine, especially when you compare it to the 1900s construction, where a house we built was completely destroyed. Here are some more houses that we built that are just gone. We have 4 blocks of our houses that we built completely wiped out. And then we have the old world building, just needing a little roof work. And there are a lot of photos of the 8,000 casualties that I'm not going to show here, obviously. But for a storm this big to hit, and the building really doesn't look affected at all, shows how impressive these structures from the old world really are. And it's interesting to see the comparisons of our construction at the exact same time, totally wiped out. Oh, and did I mention that this building we are supposed to believe was built in 1 year, over 130 years ago? And where is this thing located? Was it like 5 miles away from the ocean? And that's why it wasn't really affected by this massive hurricane? Of course not. It was right on the front lines, taking a direct hit from the 1900s hurricane. And not only did it survive the 1900s hurricane, no problem at all, it also, of course, was a survivor of Hurricane Ike after being flooded by 6 feet of water in 2008. These buildings are incredible and built with perfection, and not in a year with zero backstory. These buildings hold a hidden past, one that we are working to uncover and show to the world every single week. Today, we are going to show mathematically that the population worldwide in the last 1,400 years was basically zero. When the mainstream history tells us that at the exact same time period, where basically nobody was here, they were building palaces, castles, and cathedrals. And before we expose the population lie today, we have to get an understanding of how this all works, from the bottom up. Welcome to Reims, France, where we hold one of the most incredible structures in the world, and it's under investigation today. The Reims Cathedral, where we are being told that the construction of this cathedral started in the year 1211, where this is 813 years ago. Now, in the USA, they can tell us that these type of cathedrals were built in the 1800s. So they're at least trying to fit this type of construction into this mainstream timeline that we're given today. But when we go over to Europe, they just don't seem to care one bit. They throw dates around and everyone just accepted it for years. Could you imagine that next week, any city in the world tells us that one of these are going to be thrown together? I think the world would be shocked. Yet, when we are told that this was built 813 years ago, in the year 1211, we all just said, yeah, that sounds like a good year. Until now. Because we have patterns to look for, especially when a building holds the fire narrative, where we have found over 100 buildings to this point that hold a fire narrative, which is no longer mathematically possible. I'm in the middle of counting them all up throughout the first 62 episodes, and I'm already over 100 old world buildings that have caught fire that we have found on this channel. And we have found this fire pattern on this channel. And we will soon have a running tally on the screen every time we find a new one. And this one's going to be added to the group when we are told that this cathedral in France wasn't even the first one. They had an even earlier church that was destroyed by a fire a year before construction began on this new one. And this one lasts forever. So they knocked this thing out in 80 years when, let's be honest, if we didn't have a power tool or a car or a shipping company or any architectural training processes today, do any of us actually believe that our civilization would just knock this thing out in 80 years? Realistically, I'd love to know in the comments below how long you think this building would take today. I'm interested to see what you all think, especially because we're being told that this building was built over 800 years ago. The fact that we can see these buildings all over the world, they're still here. It's not like I'm talking about something that's a hidden mystery. We can all go there and look at it, and then compare it to the buildings that we produce today, which is supposedly over 800 years of evolving and advancing, and it's not even close. So let's think about this for a second. We are supposed to believe that they had construction down, and it was perfect since the beginning of time. Yet nothing else advanced. Only construction. Building palaces was the only thing the 1200s were good for, apparently. The problem is that the buildings are the only thing that are left from the 1200s, which is exactly why they're forced to make these dates up in order to try to explain them into our fabricated timeline. Whereas a car, or a watch, a phone, a plane, and a helicopter, they've all been here before as well. They just aren't built into the ground all over the world for all of us to see, when the buildings are. We are told that the designer of this cathedral was Jean de Orbais. And who exactly was this master designer? Starting at point guard, making his debut for the France National Historians. Jean constructed the Abbey Church, or did he find it? Where they tell us that the Abbey was found at the end of the 7th century. And don't worry, they had construction down, of course. Still there in the town center today. When they go on to say 600 years later, Jean debuts building the St. Pierre St. Paul Church, where it was built between the end of the 12th century and early 13th century. And we have all of this documented, of course. No. Today, we are going to show that there were mathematically, basically, no people here in the 12th and the 13th century. A time that the mainstream history likes to tell us was knocking out palaces. So they were just throwing dates around, telling us that they constructed the St. Paul Church between the end of the 12th and beginning of the 13th century, from 800 years ago. And we were all just nodding in acceptance for 200 years, with zero documentation proving this. This is all based on trust. And this group that we're supposed to be trusting has proven to be pretty shady, where they tell us that the architecture is superb, particularly the facade with its 2 towers, the choir with ambulatory, with 5 radiating chapels. Interesting. And telling us that in 1835, that the population of this location was only 1,000 people. And the population of England since 1801, the exact timeline that we're talking about here worldwide, from the beginning point of this fabricated mainstream timeline, beginning around 1776, was at around 9 million people. It has grown to over 56 million in just the last 220 years. So if we do the math on this, the population is decreasing at a rate of 83.92% in just the last 220 years. And this fact alone should get everyone thinking. This stat shows that in the year 1141, the time period that they're talking about here, according to the math, based on data that they're providing, the population of England would sit at 37,898 people. In the entire country, having only 37,000 people in the year 1141. And knocking out palaces is not mathematically probable at all. You would think that there would be a single argument that goes the mainstream history's way. You would think that if their tales were true, this type of stuff would not happen. Yet every single time you go deeper, there is yet another flaw. The worldwide population mathematically was basically zero based on everything that we know and have seen. In my opinion, I believe that anything before 1776 is basically fabricated, and an attempt to fit into this timeline that we are all in. And this is when we take it a step further and we go to Spain. And according to the worldometers.info, Spain's population sits at roughly 47 million people, growing around 18 million people in the last 69 years. This drop off of people is so dramatic worldwide that, in my opinion, proves that the beginning of our timeline, our batch of people, was simply not that long ago. This is according to their math, their numbers, that anyone in the world can go look at. These people of the 12 and 1300s were supposedly also without shipping companies. They were without power tools, no light bulbs, and suffering. Again, They give us these stories of the past and tell us that there were events. They tell us all of these things, where the population was this and that. But at the end of the day, we are not 100% sure that these stories from the 1300s are true. So the only math we can go off of is what we are provided from when we are actually here and documenting it. And now we can do the same thing with the worldwide population, where the population is decreasing at a rate of 66.1765% every 69 years. The rate of the population worldwide should not be increasing or decreasing by 66%. This is obviously showing that there's something going on. At this rate, 1886 would have realistically only had 928 million people, and 1817 worldwide would mathematically already have been down to 314 million people. And this is information that is provided to us, sitting right here in front of our faces, where they, in my opinion, were just waiting for us to find this. At this point, I think this is a game to this group to see who can figure this out. All of this information is all here provided with clues. All we have to do is simply look. The math doesn't lie. The worldwide population would mathematically drop down to only 106 million people in 1748, which was only 31 years after we are told that this group began. In 1679, according to this math, there were only 35 million people here. Worldwide, the population in 1610 would have only been 11.8 million. 3.9 million people in 1541, and if we bring it all the way back to the year 1200, 800 years ago, the exact same year that the mainstream history is telling us all about, like they were there and saw it happening themselves. They saw those 1200s and 1300s people just smacking those stones right into place, and they're there forever. They are telling us that it was built at the end, not the beginning, but at the end of the 12th century at this rate, every 69 years, decreasing by 66% overall. Nobody is even here. Only 17,700 people worldwide, and this is all based on basic math and numbers that are provided to us. And if this is true, this completely disproves these stories, these tales that people in the 13th century were building massive cathedrals. It basically puts an end to all historical narratives suggesting that a population of basically nobody, more specifically 17,000 people worldwide, were as advanced or more advanced than we are today in terms of construction that we can still see today, yet being primitive, wearing knight outfits, and fighting with swords, having zero power tools, no light bulbs, riding around on horses, and not having a single truck to ship millions of pounds of stone. No form of communication, other than using their local raven to send messages to far lands, having provided zero factual evidence that they were ever even transporting stones, and zero mention of any training processes ever, leaving this part of the story out every single time, or ever explaining how these shipping routes were all figured out. Where is the evidence that we need to show that their stories are true? Where is it? That civilization of nobody with nothing had the capabilities to construct castles, cathedrals, basilicas, and the rest. No. Once you actually stop and think about it for 2 seconds, it simply doesn't add up. The 1200s, riding by feathers and sleeping in huts, suffering in winters, yet knocking out massive cathedrals, faster and in most cases much better than we do today. And they last for thousands of years, and they survive floods, hurricanes, and the rest. And their population was mathematically proven to be basically nobody. This tale that we are told is nonsense at this point. Now that we all have an understanding that the worldwide population, the math, is on our side, that this is not probable, let's continue to our bonus today. An ancient cathedral located in Athens, Greece. A photo that was taken in 1860, 164 years ago, where we have shown that the worldwide population was just over 300 million, nowhere near the 8 billion mark that we are told that we have today. a cathedral that was sitting on dirt. We're gonna zoom in on this thing and find something incredible. The detail on the front of this building is unbelievable. We know that Tartaria's flag was a griffin. We've seen this logo on buildings all over the world, which we have even seen in episode 40. When we went to Wisconsin, a civilization that I believe most likely originated in the Pacific Ocean, in a no-fly zone today, and spread out to the rest of the world from that point on, as we have shown in episodes 60 and 61. As we get closer to the front of this building in Greece, we have a logo of the previous civilization. And again, these photos were taken in the 1800s in a collection by Nicholas Katsimpoulas. And here we have the Acropolis in Athens, Greece. And I was just looking at this area on Google Earth where there is another hill next to the Acropolis. I saw these stairs on the side of this hill. And it's weird because they won't let you drop the view down on them and get a closer look at them. It seems to me like this grass and dirt is covering a much larger structure that we can't see, with the stairs being exposed on the side. It looks like it's been melted and they've just built on top of it. It's very strange. So here at the top, that's where these stairs are. And down here at the bottom is the Acropolis. So you can see how close they are to each other. And before we even look at the mainstream narrative surrounding it, it should just show anyone in a split second that this site was clearly constructed by an advanced civilization. We have detailed columns all over the place. We have some sort of stage here, and we have a mainstream story that should be a lot of fun for us today. And now that we have unlocked the advanced civilization of Mu in episodes 60 and 61, that I think a lot of us enjoyed, we understand where these buildings and people most likely originated from, where Lemuria holds the name Mu inside of it, putting it right in our faces. The Hill of Mu, where Mu is also right in the name, meaning a type of goddess in Greek mythology. Another connection to Mu. It's very interesting. And before we go on with this mainstream narrative, I have to point this out. We all understand that these scaffolding that they have here for decades are put here to make us believe that our civilization is somehow helping the ancient structure survive, repairing it, when we all know that it doesn't need our help at all. This site was obviously destroyed on purpose. It is not crumbling and falling apart over time. The scaffolding is, in a sense, a magic trick. It's there to make 99% of people think that our civilization is giving this place an upgrade, making our civilization think that we are more advanced and that it needs our help, when it doesn't need our help at all. When we construct our buildings like this, and then you have the previous civilization's work towering over it, we are not evolving and we are not advancing. We have a side-by-side comparison right here. Now that we have a solid understanding of this area and what it looks like a little bit, let's all take this thing up a notch and have some fun. We know that the population mathematically was basically nothing in the 1200s. We've calculated it to around 17,700 people worldwide. Now, could you imagine the 600s based on the math and the data that we've been given, at a decreasing population rate of 66.17% every 69 years, where we saw that there would have only been 11.8 million people in 1610 and 17,000 people in the year 1196. Well, I did the math, and based on the numbers that they have provided us, and based on a 66.1765% population decrease rate per 69 years, in the year 600, the population worldwide would have been 3 people, meaning that either the beginning of human existence was in or around the year 644, based on math, or something massive happened and reset the population very recent. Either way, something massive is going on here that's just been uncovered, especially when the mainstream history tells us that the Acropolis of Athens, Greece, was constructed on a massive hill around the year -1300 to -1200, which we know the population worldwide would have been 0. Even if the population hasn't always decreased at 66%, the simple fact is that going back in time, the population decreases. This is proven through the data that they provided us, the population in negative 1300, however you want to go about it, would have been zero. If you are going off the mainstream story, their data, you can say that there were plagues. You can say that there were these stories, when we know that these stories have massive flaws at this point. Anything provided hundreds of years ago can easily be picked apart. We have done this hundreds of times at this point, based on facts, things that we can prove, things that we have here, right in front of us, data. It proves to me that we aren't wrong. The population data was always a massive key for us, a key that proves that there was a previous civilization here before us, and something massive happened in this place that we all live, right around the year 1776, worldwide. This information, this data, that 3 people were here worldwide in the year 644. This math, it's been here. It's always been here. It's just been waiting for us to see it. And now that we all do, we can all go much, much deeper. It's been a while since we've investigated my personal favorite location for the old world research. A place that by just being there will put you right back into the old world instantly. And that place is Budapest, where we have Buda Castle, where they have broken the rooms of this palace into 6 different things, including a national gallery, a historical museum, and a library. A palace library in Budapest, where we know this isn't the only library in Budapest, where they also have the Metropolitan Urban Library, located right down the road, housing Budapest's largest public collection of books, over 1.1 million volumes. And Budapest must like their books, since we also have the Americana Public Library of Budapest. And we've seen this one before, which is right next to the Parliament building. Have you ever seen a library like this in your life? Do any of our towns have any future plans to knock any libraries out that look anything like this in the upcoming months? No. So these libraries are all right next to each other. Let's go back to the first one, within the walls of Buda Castle. And this is very interesting. When they do the same thing that we've seen all over the world, and they name it something else. If you're just reading through this very quickly, they act like this thing was built in 1802, and they try to trip people up with the constant name-changing game. When we know this isn't true. We know that it wasn't originally a library. We know that this is a part of Buda Castle, where Buda Castle, we are told, and according to their story, was built between 1247 and 1265, 777 years ago. Not even close to this 1802 date. And they have these dates down. Everything is documented. No mistakes were ever made because these 1200s people were just hard workers. They weren't distracted, and they were just very dedicated to their craft. They worked by candlelight and touched up that stone with their lucky duck feathers. And it's here forever. They pretend to have these dates pinned down, 1247, and not 1246. And King Bela IV of Hungary, him and his crew, wrapped this thing up in 1265 on the dot. They know all of the information. The whole story is documented, but they give us 0 details on the construction every single time. They don't tell us who these master builders were. They don't tell us where they learned this technology to build massive palaces. The king just got it done, and that's that. And we're supposed to just believe that. They give us these drawings of it, with 2 guys in a canoe, just taking it all in, from 1490 on the dot. When we all know that this could have been easily drawn last night. And 3 years later, they found some colored pencils and got this one done for us. It's very nice of them. 30 years later, the color is gone, and we are back to black and white. And 2 more people waving down here at the bottom. And Budapest had a very nice community in the 1530s, 100 years later, according to the mainstream narrative. 100 years later, we're back to color. Cannons firing at each other, where we all know that firing cannons into your own buildings is completely normal and realistic. Now, on September 11, 1526, 498 years ago, Buddha was sacked and burned. And the royal palace was not damaged, of course. The statues were destroyed a few years later. This is all documented and the paperwork is in hand. No. So many times, they have zero documented information about the 1800s. So many times, they don't know who the architect was or who the construction company was. You can see this for yourself when we emailed these buildings in episode 33. But they can pin down a date in 1526, and they know all about the story. Now, we also know that they tell us that Buddha Castle was constructed in 1247 to 1265. Mathematically, according to the data that they provided us, that the world population is decreasing every 69 years, going back in time, at a rate of 66.1765%. And this is according to what we are being told, where we have shown that the population in 1265 was only 52,000 people worldwide, not just in Budapest. The size of a town today was the size of the world population in the year that they're telling us that they knocked out a palace that lasts forever. Now, we all know that this was constructed by a very powerful, very intelligent civilization, and the population worldwide definitely took a massive hit at some point before the 1700s, where humans, I believe, repopulate back to billions of people relatively fast. I think the real population chart looks much different than what we're shown. I think that there are many times that the population worldwide is in the billions. Based on what they're telling us, you can look at this chart for yourself, showing that basically nobody was even here in the 1200s, according to the mainstream narrative. This shows that nobody could build massive palaces with no power tools, zero equipment, no training processes. The 25 people that lived in Budapest, their only edge against our civilization today was having a little better work ethic. And that's not working anymore. These charts are nonsense. They show how fast humans truly do recreate to the population that we're at today, which is why they are able to reset the population so often, in my opinion, using the same ridiculous narratives over and over for the exact same buildings, using the same technology that was here before, and just pretending like it's all brand new. Where this place that we live is much different than we're being told, where everything is reused. Everything is given back to us. Everything is one big cycle. Everything. The years go from January to December. Every year. Seasons, days, technology, and civilizations. Everything is one big cycle. Everything. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if we do too. I wonder if they know this. This all feels like some sort of treasure hunt, like some sort of game. To see who can find this information, where we have all heard the saying that they have to tell us like it's a rule, where I'm starting to think it's not that they have to tell us, it's that they want to tell us, like it's fun to them. To see who can crack the code, that nearly everything in our so-called reality is complete nonsense. And our true reality is much deeper than what we're told, where one of the only things that is free in this world is an indoctrination program that comes to your house in the morning and picks you up every single day as a small kid. And you don't know any different because your parents did the same thing too. Until now. So the last time we looked into Budapest, we saw this courtyard where they have this library, and it's right next to the Parliament building that we have talked about. It also has the Chocolate Museum and so much more, where today I want to show you all why Budapest is my #1 location worldwide. And it's because nearly every single building is a palace. If there's one place in the world I would want to visit, this is it. And I would love to go inside these buildings and see if there's basements, and see if these basements had tunnels, windows, and doors that lead to dirt. I wouldn't be shocked at all. We see this kind of stuff in the USA, so seeing it in Budapest, I'm sure these tunnels would be incredible. I wouldn't be shocked at all if these buildings are bigger than we can see under the ground. So here we have another museum where they have taken the true meaning of this building right off the front. where this gets interesting. They tell us that the past 150 years of this building's history have been largely determined by a struggle to maintain its facilities and keep its collections safe. Struggling to keep its collections safe? From who? Is there a reason that Budapest is still filled with palaces and the rest of the world has had thousands of fires in individual buildings that we have located, thousands of buildings destroyed in so-called great fires, carpet bombed in wars, like we have seen in Dresden, Germany, where in my opinion, every single one of these major cities worldwide looked like Budapest. Budapest has survived all of these things, the great fires, the wars, and the rest. Is there something protecting this location? It's very interesting. And remember, this is the location that Nikola Tesla went and worked in 1881, where he was the chief electrician and then went to the USA and had all of these incredible inventions. Now, were they inventions or did he learn a few things while over in Budapest? Now, we have seen the exact same narrative before, where we go back to our Balboa Park episodes, where they say that they moved from building to building over and over and over before finally settling on a palace. And it lasts forever and looks like it was built by the gods. We are told that they moved into its first home in 1892. 1 year later, inadequate conditions forced them to move again into an apartment building. 1898, their permanent location was born. Well, no, because 1906 they moved again to the Millennial Exhibition's empty Hall of Industry. But in 1924, storm damage, of course, prompted yet another relocation over to a school building, where 5 years later they reopened, using 30 schoolrooms, until 1975 rolls around and they get the Palace of Justice building. So they just throw all of these locations into the story to distract us all from the point. And the point is that this is a palace and we want to know the true history of the building. We don't care about this random group that is occupying the palace. At least not today we don't. It's literally throwing a bunch of nonsense out there and hoping we give up by the time we get to the end of the story. That has nothing to do with what we want to know. The good thing is we found the building and we have gotten through the nonsense. The Palace of Justice was designed by Elias Hausmann. And we're definitely going to get back to this guy later in the episode. In 1891, knocking this building out in 3 years in the 1800s, before the power tool was invented. In 1895, where it has a lobby with marble columns and an impressive staircase. And this is just your everyday museum in Budapest. If you want to feel like you're back in the previous civilization, all you got to do is go to Budapest. It is by far the most incredible place that I've seen to this point. And I honestly don't think that we've even covered 1% of it, where they also tell us that this building is under renovation. And I was honestly disappointed to see that last sentence, because we all know that restoration really means destruction. So I found some really cool pictures of this place that I thought you'd all want to see. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we have the best part, in my opinion, where we are given the individual that is pinned as the man that got this palace done, Mr. Hausmann, where we know that when they pin a guy to one building, they pin him to a lot more. They give us this list where they pin this character to 39 palaces, where the first one was destroyed by a fire. So we can add that one to our running tally. And they even pin him as a contest winner of the Parliament building. But they just didn't want to use his design because they have so many more contest winners out there in the 1800s. It's ridiculous. They destroy 6 of his buildings, including his first 4 buildings. And they tell us that this guy was knocking these palaces out all over Budapest in the 1800s before power tools, in like 1 or 2 years each. All of them coming back to back to back. When he starts building in 1870 and gets both buildings done that year, 71 to 72, another one done. Between 1874 and 1893, just 19 years, this guy is pinned to getting 33 palaces done When we know that in modern times, realistic times, when we are all here to see it, the Kleksinski building in Chicago takes 14 years. One building, not 33 buildings, and it's a box, not a palace. And we have power tools, and this guy doesn't. Where it's time to see some of these buildings that this guy is pinned to. Let's start at the top. The first one that they didn't destroy, Church of the Sacred Heart, where this is a worldwide agenda, a worldwide narrative key. And we unlocked it right here on this channel in the 8th of April, 1848. A huge fire burst out, and the Catholic Church burnt down to the ground, where the Savior, the man, the myth, and the legend builds them a new one. When we know that this church, the one we're looking at, it is the original building. Finding a fire narrative never gets old to me. It actually surprises me more and more every single time. It's really shocking that this information, this clue, was just sitting here and we never saw it until now. They tell us that this building was done in a year, and then the next one was done in 2 years, where we clearly have technology on the roof of this thing. And it's very odd when you look at their Facebook page, where we know that they tell us that it was constructed in 1878. These gravestones are dated 1792 to 1869 and 1796 to 1834. This is not even close to the construction date that they're telling us of 1878, and would predate this master builder character, where we are told that he was born in 1847, which is 13 years after this person passed away that lived there. So we know at this point that something major is off with this narrative and this character, and this character is beginning to look sketchy. Not only is that all strange, but we also have this guy off building like 6 other palaces at the same exact time. The City Hall Amphitheater, which was destroyed. And then we have this, his 11th building in his young career, where he was only 23 years old when he began knocking out palaces without a power tool, just using his local donkey to pull the stone. We now are given the Austro-Hungarian Bank, which I believe is definitely helping us pin down where our timeline begins. We know about the population. We know about the Great Fires. We know about the inventions. And now we need to see when the money all begins, where they tell us where it started issuing banknotes in 1762, where we also know that this group started in 1717. And for the first time in this timeline's history, the Austrian government issues paper money and caused inflation, where we're just getting started. So we know this group began in 1717. We know that all of these inventions, the car, the train, the plane, all of it, came within the last 200 years. We know that these great fires all over the world happened in the 1800s and took basically nobody's life. We know that the population spiked around the 1800s, from basically nobody to billions of people in just the last 200 years, where we are starting to pin the start date of our current timeline down, because today we're taking this research a step further. Today, we are looking into the money. On April 2nd, 1792, the US Congress passed the Mint Act, which was the beginning of the dollar. It was also the first country in the world to adopt the decimal system for currency. And now when we go over to the UK and see that they also started to use the British pound in 1707, making it the official currency of the UK. When England and Scotland united to form a single country. Even China making a brand new currency in 1948. This new currency was introduced in 1948, taking over the previous currency, which was introduced in 1889. All of these currencies, all starting within the last 300 years, worldwide, where we can go to Russia and see that their currency also begins in 1704. So apparently, in the 1600s, nobody had any money, and yet we are told that they were knocking out palaces all over the world. I think we're seeing that our timeline really began right around 1700. I think this is when all of the structural things, like governments, banks, the foundation of our civilization, I think this is when it all began. And this is all based on what we're being told, the dates that they provide us, the information that we are given using their data. So we have the top 10 banks in the world based on market cap, with JP Morgan at number 1, with a start date of 1871. Bank of America, starting in 1922. Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, started in 1984. Now we have shown that so much has started within the last 300 years. Everything that we have today that is a part of our civilization has been introduced within the last 300 years. And at the exact same time, right when we get the USA, right when we get these banks, these currencies, right when all this happens, this is the exact point in time that our civilization sees a massive spike in population. At no other point in time have humans repopulated at this rate of 66% increase every 69 years. Billions of people at a rapid pace, according to the mainstream narrative. We are told that we're at our peak right now. We are the most advanced civilization ever. We have the most technology. We have the most amount of people, when this is simply not true in my opinion. I believe that we have been given all of this technology back. I've said this before, but it is so true. I believe that our civilization is as advanced as we're allowed to be. We see these inventions just flying at us in the 1800s. Cars, phones, TVs, electricity, planes, you name it. When you're in charge of controlling an entire civilization, 300 years is nothing. To us, the 1800s were a long time ago, but in reality, this is nothing. We are being told that AI is a brand new thing, when it has, in my opinion, been here a very long time. And if we're being shown AI, could you imagine what else is not being shown to us? Thinking logically and using the information that we're provided, in my opinion, we are pinning this narrative down. We are finding our civilization's beginning point. And the more people that see this, the more people that understand this information, the more people that we have researching and looking for the truth, the probability of us finding the truth about our past becomes more and more eminent. All of this explains why we have buildings sitting in all of our cities and most of our towns that don't fit into our timeline. They don't look anything like the way we build today. And the only way to explain it logically is that an advanced civilization was here before us that fully understood how to create massive palaces. And it was a civilization that was worldwide. We see these cathedrals and basilicas in every single continent. It's not like it was just limited to a single location. This was a worldwide understanding, and something massive happened to them. And right around 1700, our civilization began occupying this land, with their work looking us straight in the face. We were looking into Budapest, and we found this character that was building palaces at 23 years old, winning contests for massive parliament buildings, where Budapest had so many master palace architects that they didn't even need to use the winner's design. Mr. Hausmann was pinned to a lot of buildings, like we have shown, but we need to officially close the book on this guy. We have covered the New York Palace in Budapest, which is now a 185-room palace hotel and cafe. They tell us that this building opened up in 1894 as the headquarters for the New York Life Insurance Company, where life insurance is yet another thing that starts right up in 1706. The first company to ever offer life insurance was founded in London, 1706, 1 year before the British pound became the official currency of the UK. At this point, it is becoming incredibly evident that something massive happened at this point in time. It's just one thing after the next. And if all of this wasn't true, then the mainstream narrative would have given us something major that was created in the 1500s by now. A single company from the 1400s. You would think that there would be some sort of progression over time, that something would still be here from the 1500s. It's not mathematically probable that every single invention, all the money, billions of people, all of it, comes in a matter of 300 years. And before this, basically nobody rode around on donkeys and lived by candlelight, riding with duck feathers, yet knocked out massive castles and basilicas. It doesn't add up at all. Everything was given back to us, starting around this date of 1700, where in my opinion, they were laying the groundwork, the foundation of our new civilization, and our new civilization was being formed. And then after it was all situated, and they had control over all the major things that a controller would want to be in control of, governments and laws, financial institutions, insurance companies, taxes, and the rest. After this was done, the okay was given to start repopulating this place again. And 300 years later, here we all are. And this is becoming clearer and clearer by the episode. When we take a look at inflation, where it basically follows the exact same chart that the world population does when we have nothing going on before the 1700s, and then just takes off. I think we have located the beginning point of our current civilization based on math and information that they have provided us, where there's nothing, and out of nowhere in 1700, everything is created and billions of people just come out of nowhere. Inventions all over the place, with wars to confuse people, demoralize the ones involved, and destroy massive cities that give it all away. Where, according to the data provided, people reproduce at basically 66% growth every 69 years. And this is documented. So what was going on in the 1200s? Well, according to the mainstream narrative, everybody stayed away from each other. Nobody wanted kids apparently. For hundreds and thousands of years, the population was basically nobody. And then the 1700s hit, and all of a sudden humans want to repopulate at a rate that's never been seen before. And it's not even close, where it goes from nobody to billions of people in just a few hundred years, when we know that this is the rate in which humans repopulate. And they know this as well. And when you wipe the population out, humans will repopulate at this rate yet again. We have so many different things that show that this is the case, basically proving that there have been previous civilizations. And at this point, it wouldn't be shocking at all if it was over 100 billion people and they were extremely advanced, a community that can't see until the savior, Benjamin, comes around, where 63.7% of people need glasses today. And I'm just gonna take a guess and say that the 1200s people didn't have 20/20 vision either, meaning that they also needed glasses, but we are told they didn't have them. And they also didn't have a light bulb. So no lights, no glasses. Could you imagine this group of people in the 1200s, where we are told that they built Buddha Castle, stumbling around at night with no glasses and no lights, yet getting palaces done no problem at all, and not a single mistake anywhere. Over 100 feet in the air, perfectly put together by people that can't see. A community that supposedly didn't even create the pencil for another 500 years. But Buddha castles are no problem at all, where in the future, we can even show that the oldest prison in the USA was built in 1720, where you might say, yeah, that's because the USA was formed in 1776. And then we go over to England, and the first state prison in England was the Millbank Prison, established in 1816. And 8 years later, in 1824, 54 other prisons had formed and adopted this system. The St. Paul St. Louis, which is a church located in Paris, France, with construction beginning in 1627. Beginning in 1627. 397 years ago, in a time period that we have shown, according to the mainstream narrative, had just a little over no people, yet able to knock out the Buddha Castle and massive palaces. It was the booming 1600s, before all currencies. They just decided they would just go trade a donkey or two for some limestone. They would give the architect a pineapple for his skills. And this was completed in 1641, perfectly. They give us this story that we have seen so often, where the first church on the exact same site was built around 1125, 899 years ago. And they give us a story of a chemist that gets guillotined, just to make us think that they know all about the backstory of these buildings, where we have shown in episode 33, when you just email them about a building that was built in the 1900s, they have no clue who built it. These narratives are story hour, in my opinion. They hold zero truth. They are as trustworthy as a child's bedtime story, where we are told that there was a cemetery connected to this first church, the one that was built 900 years ago. And then this cemetery just disappeared, and the old church was demolished in 1799 because they just needed an upgrade in 1799. And here's another one of those situations where we have these reoccurring names with these stories, where we've seen all the Fredericks in episode 43. But here they give the reoccurring names in a different way. When they say Louis the Ninth and Louis the Eighth, where I understand that this is possible, but we've seen it so many times. The reoccurring names are, in my opinion, exposing that these stories were created by an AI generator. It throws the same name right into the story over and over. It's a pattern. And the AI works on patterns, where if a human wrote this story, they would just make up a new name. And I think this is why we see so many people named Henry the Ninth in these narratives from hundreds of years ago. I think it's a code. They could just say Henry the 30th, and nobody would ever question it. Just accepting this narrative for years, when I think it's clearly a key to look deeper into these stories, these buildings and castles surrounding these characters. So the city supposedly grew too big, and the chapel was replaced, where they know that Louis VIII laid the cornerstone. And when you know, you know. The building's original name holds Mason, Jesuits. The architect of the new church was the Jesuit priest. So now we are made to believe that the 1600s priests were also master architects. This was the first church in Paris to stop using the Gothic style and now use the Baroque style, when the famous Jesuit preacher preached some of his memorable sermons in the church. All documented, of course? No. So my question is, who is this Jesuit priest architect that just knocks out palaces in the 1600s that last forever? We are told that he was born in 1569 and had two brothers who both became Jesuits as well. Almost nothing is known about his early life. Nothing. It's a big mystery, just like the mainstream narrative likes it. But don't worry, they know all about every other detail of the rest of his life. Joining the Jesuit order in 1590, when he was 21, this group, the Jesuits, established themselves in France in the 1560s, but were banned in 1595 after attempting to kill Henry IX. But that's okay, because they let him back in 8 years later. So this master architect, he wasn't even the best one, where he would supposedly draw up all these kinds of buildings, no problem at all, and send them back to a superior general that would have to approve them. So we're supposed to believe a time period where we're told that the population was like 10 people. They also had all kinds of people just waiting around to draw up palaces. And some guy was sitting in his chair throwing master designs in the no pile. How ridiculous does this sound? Now, of course, when they pin a guy to one building, there are always so many more. Here's the first one, which is still in use today. Built this one, and then he also supposedly built the Blois Cathedral, a cathedral that also had multiple buildings. The first one started in the 1100s. However, nothing is left of the original structure. It's just gone. And the next one starts 450 years later. Of course it does. When this one is destroyed by a storm, they get back to work in the 1680s. And then the Americans' bombardment during World War II destroys most of the glasswork in the cathedral. When we know that this sounds like there was something on the glass that told a story, possibly things that would give something away about our past, things that we're not supposed to see. Thinking logically, why would the glass be broken and everything else is fine? It sounds to me like these people just went in there and broke the glass and replaced it with the new narrative. What better way to do this than to just chalk it up to a war? Today, I'm going to introduce an alternative conclusion. as to why these palaces are all over the world today. I'm going to attempt to take our thought process a little deeper. And we're also going to see a palace in Russia that we are told has a painter that died years before the construction was even close to being done. Because we all paint our house before it's built. No. Right here on stpetersburg.com, we are given a panoramic shot of St. Petersburg, Russia, with perfect dirt roads where I don't see a single person. Massive buildings everywhere, yet not one person. These photos are from 1861, only 3 years after they say that this was constructed. You can see this palace in the fourth shot in the panoramic view, where it's becoming clearer and clearer that these cities all over the world, palaces, were constructed by a massive civilization, one that was here before us, a civilization that had incredible technology, and a civilization that was here only a few hundred years ago, a civilization that is clearly being hidden to us. Yet their construction sits here looking at us straight in the face. These photos are alarming in my opinion. Everyone should be asking questions at this point. One question should be, who paved all of this dirt? Like it's all perfectly prepared for these photos. And I'm going to suggest an alternative, much less likely idea, an idea that should just be out there for people to think about. And possibly not just an alternative idea, but something that could definitely be an addition to what we have already known. That there was a previous civilization here before us. But after doing countless hours of this research on this topic, after looking at these photos, where these cities look like they were on display for all of us, almost like they were prepared for us, cleaned up perfectly, and ready for us all to come into the picture in the late 1700s. An idea that I'm just going to throw out there into the world for everyone to think about, instead of being just stuck in my head, is, are there two groups? One that actually cared about us, possibly created us, and set this stage for us, and one that does not care about us, with the corrupt group still being here, and the other group that built our incredible stage and felt that we deserved the greatest palaces to live in and use. The group that fully understood this type of incredible construction, possibly no longer here, with a corrupt group that ended up wanting to control an entire population, us. Changing the narrative to all of these buildings, hijacking all of the buildings, calling them Capitol buildings, banks. Buildings for them now, and no longer for us. Buildings that were always and originally meant for us, where they are now used as this group's offices to control us. Destroying the rest of the buildings with wars, great fires that weren't so great, tricking us for 200 plus years, giving us a ridiculous story that a group of people that had a population of basically nobody, that rode around on donkeys with no technology, were the master builders of stone-carved and marble basilicas that stand the test of time all over the world, when in reality it was a much more powerful group that is no longer here, or maybe they are, and watching from a distance. A group that set the stage for all of us, built all of these incredible buildings that we have been talking about this entire time. Temples, cathedrals, basilicas, Capitol buildings, houses that are white, and no, not the vinyl siding ones. Is it possible that we are so much more important, so much more powerful than we are told, and completely tricked and manipulated into thinking that we are just these lazy pawns to these corrupt individuals that stole our buildings, our land, our lives, making us feel like we're born just to work and sleep, just to struggle, over and over, when in reality, our lives are so much more important and incredibly valuable. In reality, they have stolen our buildings, taken them from us, and giving us these depressing, ugly boxes in return, which are demoralizing to look at. We know that the historical narrative that we are currently given is complete nonsense. We have proven this, in my opinion. We have shown massive flaws, including the population lie, where supposedly we are being told that nobody wants to have kids with anyone for thousands of years. And then in the 1700s, out of nowhere, conveniently, right when all the financial institutions begin, the human mind changes for the first time ever. Just a random fluke, we are told. And people finally enjoy each other's company and finally want to have kids with each other. And this narrative was accepted for far too long. Believing this narrative, this chart, is borderline insanity. What we don't know, and what we all want to know, is where we are. What is the truth? Who actually built these buildings? They are incredible, and nothing like the buildings that we build today. It's built by a different mindset. They're built with much more technology, much more information that we do not have. We are not taught these skills in our highest architecture classes. Which class shows us how to knock out a palace in a year with no power tools, no light bulbs, no shipping companies, nothing? That chapter was left out of the college architecture book. We all know this. These buildings that we all see in every single one of our cities, they tell a much different story than what we've all been told by the mainstream narrative. And this narrative, this lie, it only helps one group, and the group is not us. There was a previous civilization that was here before us, a civilization that was massive and held incredible technology. But there is a very real possibility in my mind that there are also higher powers that are possibly still here that set this current stage for us. And the game has now been corrupted. We don't advance our overall thought process by simply being quiet. Who maintained all of this dirt? We're being told that a civilization of no people had the capabilities to construct an entire palace city. And this city will last forever. Yet when you look at the finished product, there isn't a single person anywhere. It's empty. And here we have St. Isaac's Cathedral, located in St. Petersburg, Russia. And the inside just blows your mind, with massive doors, incredible detail, with a height of over 330 feet. And we are told the exact same story that we've seen all over the world, that this wasn't even the first structure. This one was the replacement. In fact, it was the fourth consecutive church standing at this place. The exact same location has had 4 churches here. This is what we're being told. I'm shocked that this pattern, that 4 buildings have been on the same site. How has this pattern not been identified before? We see the exact same thing, even over in Texas, when they have 7 courthouses on the exact same site. We've seen it all over. It's a repeating pattern. All of these narratives all over the world are, in my opinion, created by the same source. And in my opinion, based on everything that we've seen, it's an AI, very similar to ChatGPT. This palace has bronze doors, internal columns, statues on the inside, and of course, the interior was originally decorated with paintings that have been since painted over. And supposedly they reproduced them. They had to get rid of the originals because they deteriorated because of the cold and damp conditions inside. This is incredible how they get away with destroying the originals over and over. We are told that this building was constructed between 1818 and 1858. When we can easily catch this narrative in a lie, when we go to Vatican City and take a look at Sistine Chapel, where Michelangelo painted this in 1508 to 1512. Supposedly, predating this Russian painting by over 300 years. And it's holding up just fine, unless, of course, Michelangelo had a better paint set. It's ridiculous. So the paintings should have been just fine in Russia. And this is when the story gets even weirder, when they tell us that during World War II, the dome was also painted over, making it gray, to avoid attention from enemy aircraft. So I hope we're all seeing very clearly at this point what these wars, seeing what their true purpose was. Clearly destroying these buildings, removing the inside because it was too cold. Give me a break. And they say the work was never completed. But when you take a look at the inside, it looks pretty completed to me. It doesn't even look like they missed one spot. And they tell us that the original paintings were done by this Karl guy and other random Russian masters of the day. And of course, no need to name these Russian masters of the day, but here is Karl. It was the pose of the day. Could you imagine if we gave information the way the mainstream narrative did? Just saying they were the flavor of the day, painted by the painters of the day, like it's some sort of special on the menu. It's incredible how this was accepted as fact for so long. It's shocking. And Karl died before the construction was done. Do we all paint our houses before the construction is done? Or is this the last step in the process? It is the last step. You don't paint your house years before it's done. He died in 1852. we are told that the building is done in 1858. So this guy that put the finishing touches on the palace is dead 6 years before the building is done. So we know we don't paint our house 6 years before it's done. Oh, and if we go down here at the bottom, we can see that this was his self-portrait. Very nice choice, Carl. Let's take a look at the technologies of this palace, where William Handyside is the engineer. So Handyside is the guy where they get 10,000 tree trunks and throw them into the marshy banks. So they want us to believe that there's just a bunch of tree trunks under this palace. And I know they are a bunch of liars at this point. So when we see something like this, I know to go deeper. This statement makes me think that there is something under this palace that has significant value. When we can see that this building has artwork and exhibits from a museum that were hidden away in the cathedral's basement. So now we know that this palace has a basement with valuables in it, and all chalked up to this war again. So they lay down these 10,000 tree trunks on a marshy bank, and then knock out a massive basement on top of all that, and then build a palace, and paint it before it's done, and then get rid of those paintings because it's a little too cold, but never finish those paintings, of course. Oh, and this is the fourth palace on the same site. It sounds like a lie. I wonder how much bigger this palace is underground, like we have seen in episode 44, when we caught a tunnel on camera from the Illinois State Capitol building while they were in the middle of destroying something and just call it a renovation project. So here's the construction photo that they give us. A photo from expresstoRussia.com. There's a big problem though with this picture. It's a drawing. And we know that they had cameras in 1816. So why give us a drawing? I've said this before, but it's so true. For all we know, they just drew this last night. It's a drawing. It's obviously not proof of construction. Not even close. Here we are told we have a view of the cathedral surrounded by wood scaffolding from another drawing, drawn 3 years ago by a master drawer of the day, as the mainstream narrative likes to say. It's incredible. So in 1931, they turned this cathedral into a museum when, under the Soviet government, the building was stripped of religious trappings. In 1931, it was turned into the Museum of the History of Religion and Atheism. So the complete opposite of a cathedral. Going back to my suggestion that there's possibly a group that wants to take these buildings that were originally meant for us in a positive manner and turn them into the complete opposite, removing everything that was once given to all of us, a cathedral, changed to a museum of history and atheism, where the original dove structure was removed and replaced by a Foucault pendulum, which we all know at this point is some weird symbol for this group, a group that's clearly addicted to symbols. Let's check this palace out, now that we know that this building's narrative is forever in shreds. So here we have the St. Isaac's Cathedral, and right over here we have another building that'll no longer be hidden in plain sight, the Mariinsky Palace. Now let's have some fun. And make sure you don't confuse it with the theater. And thank you for letting us know about this masterpiece. Is there a more entertaining topic? Finding buildings, palaces, that make no sense in the fabricated timeline that we're given. Palaces that we can actually go and visit, especially when we're told that this was built in a year. And unfortunately, the original building was destroyed by a fire in 1859. Adding to our fire total. Is your mind blown yet? Should we go deeper? The new one, the one that's here today, the palace opened up the very next year. So the theater's narrative is clearly a mess. So let's go back to this palace, where in 1839, they were building palaces as wedding presents. This is incredible. Built in 5 years, from 1839, and wrapped it right up in 1844. And then, of course, taken over by the Russian government and off limits to the public. Were these buildings built for them? It's definitely an interesting thought that these narratives are thrown together by this group as a successful attempt to steal these buildings from us and clearly getting away with it, and then create the passport so that if we want to go visit these lands that were once all ours, you need to make sure you have your papers. I don't think this was the world that was created for all of us. I think it was the complete opposite. And it's been 100% infiltrated worldwide. And it's beginning to feel more and more like everyone's starting to realize that. And I was looking at this area and saw these two buildings in the background that clearly look out of place. So let's check this one out first. A building that was taken over by the Russian Navy, where they tell us that an earlier wooden church sat on the exact same site. And then we have the other palace that we just saw. And remember, all of these buildings, they're all right next to each other. This is the Trinity Cathedral, where let's just close this episode off properly. Let's show the world that the lie is over. It's game over for the mainstream narrative. And there is no going back. We will all never forget this. The more and more people that see the lies, the faster the truth is going to be shown to us, where we are told that the Trinity Cathedral was constructed in 1828 to 1835, and in 2006, the blaze apparently started on scaffolding on the outside of the church, which was undergoing restoration. And we all know that restoration really means destruction. I was gonna wait until I went back to this incredible location to cover this city again, but there are so many buildings here in this location that we're just gonna start in on this place right now. Welcome back to Edinburgh, Scotland, where we know about the Scots Monument. We've talked about it a little, but today we are gonna be going even deeper into the narrative and the buildings surrounding it, including the Caledonian, a 5-star hotel in Edinburgh, Scotland, that holds a narrative that will show the world how childish and beyond immature the mainstream narrative really is. A narrative that, if it was ever trusted in your mind, should be done being trusted after what I show you next. A hotel that had a master architect by the name of John Moore Dick. If you can believe that one, where we have seen these ridiculous names so many times before. In my opinion, they are just total jokes, where they were probably laughing while entering that name into the story. And this whole thing was just supposedly constructed in 4 years. And of course, they have to throw the fire narrative right into the story, where the hotel was built on top of the stone, V-shaped station building that had recently been built as a replacement for the previous wooden station, which was of course damaged in a fire in June of 1890. And right next to this building, we have the Scots Monument. That's now a monument that you can't miss while walking around Edinburgh. All supposedly dedicated to a writer, Sir Walter Scott. Because we just whip these things together for writers nowadays. No, we don't. One of the largest monuments dedicated to a writer in the world, in my personal opinion, based on everything that we've seen. This was not created for a writer. This was here much longer than we are told, especially when we are told that Scott died in 1832, and 4 years later, 188 years ago. They just had so many master architects just hanging around the city that they were able to hold a competition, and the winner drew this up and knocked it out no problem, all for a writer that we only have a painting of. Now, we have a massive flaw in the narrative when we see that there is a monument of Sir Walter himself, a marble statue, fashioned from a single piece of marble. Now, the sculptor took 6 years just to sculpt this little tiny statue. And it's not even the same material or color as the rest of the structure, which is odd in itself. In my opinion, it was put there by our civilization. Yet, the entire monument supposedly took 8 years. Yet, in all of the construction photos, the thing is done, as we have seen all over the world. And when we take a look at this photo, you can see the bottom of the photo is showing something in the dirt. Is this thing bigger than we can see under the ground? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And we have a few more photos that are very interesting, with none of it looking like it was brand new at all. Here's another photo from the area where we can clearly see an obelisk and the Edinburgh Castle in the background, which we have gone inside of in episode 8. Now, this entire city is insane, If you've gone to Harry Potter Land at Universal Studios, you are getting ripped off. All you gotta do is go to Edinburgh for the real thing. I'm just gonna show you this city on Google Earth for a minute. All right, so if we go over here, right across the road, we have the museum on the mound, which we are told has an extensive basement area where we know that these buildings most likely are all connected underground. We have shown this in Wisconsin. And if they're connected in Wisconsin, then they are definitely connected here in Scotland. Built over 220 years ago and completed in just 5 years. And this is what we're told. Even faster than the Scots Monument little statue. It's incredible. And the owner of this building is the Bank of Scotland. Another bank that gets an old world building. And we continue over here. We have what looks like a church, but they had so many of these structures that they just called this one a meeting place of the General Assembly. And they admit it. It looks like a church, but it's never actually been a church. And now, well, it's called the Hub, where they hold events. Just a nice place to hold events. So that's a first for me. I've never seen where they just have so many church-looking buildings that they just need to use it for something else. And this one was constructed in just 5 years. Also taking less time than that little statue at Scott's Monument. And the clock was, of course, built by a guy and his son, which we've seen all over the world. The sons of the 1800s just knew how to get the job done. These buildings, this city, it is incredible. So right over here, right next to all of this, we have this massive castle where the mainstream narrative now just gets wild. Predating Donkeys Incorporated. Predating the 1800s masterminds. When the story's beginnings are from 931 years ago. When they know that the queen died there in the year 1093. And then they had to wait 418 years to get anything else done when the Great Hall was finally completed for King James IV, where the king had little time to enjoy his new addition because he died 2 years later. And this is all documented. We have the paperwork on all of this. No. 1566, James VI comes around. And we've talked about the reoccurring names. And this is, in my opinion, another example of this, with brother-in-laws that are also named Henry VIII. And then we get a 13-month-old king. When 1603 rolls around, now the mainstream narrative is very entertaining if you really believe it. It's like a good sitcom. So James VI, the 13-month-old king that we are told about from 400 years ago, born in a castle and loved witchcraft. So we can see how close this all is to the Scots Monument. And right down the street, we just have palace after palace after palace. Have we found a place that is a better example of the old world that's possibly taking over my #1 spot over Budapest? This place is incredible. Located at 1 Prince's Street, we have the Balmoral, or originally the North British Station Hotel, a 167-room palace hotel where they needed another competition to knock out another palace. Can you believe this? They had so many master architects in the 1800s, while people were riding around on donkeys, saddling up to ride around town with wagons attached to the back. They hold these competitions to construct massive palaces that last forever. Palaces that you don't see being constructed today in any of our towns. Yet, they were just supposedly throwing them together all over the place, over and over and over. Built in just 6 years, from 1896 to 1902. So the exact same amount of time that it took to build the statue over at Scott's Monument. I definitely want to stay here in this hotel one day, in the near future. And if I do, I'll make sure to share all about it. I want to see the inside and hopefully take a tour and see if these places have a basement. All right, and then we're going to zoom out on Google Earth and see that they have multiple golf courses. Now, I know this is where we were told that golf originated in Scotland, but we also know that golf courses cover a lot of land. And we've seen multiple times how golf courses are most likely covering something up from the old world. like we have shown in our Balboa Park episodes, episode 55 and episode 56, as well as episode 33. There's something interesting going on here for sure. Now, we showed the obelisk, which is located at Calton Hill, right next to everything that we've shown today. And this is when we get the connection, where we get the Robert Burns Memorial, where there is a life-size statue of Burns himself. Burns himself. Burns himself? Really? Is this not another fire narrative, throwing it right into his name, like we've seen with F.L. Ames or Flames? And then the monument is, of course, no longer publicly accessible. And we all know this story revolves around Robert Burns. Yet the name Robert is thrown in a few more times, just to make sure that the clue has been given. When we see Robert Ferguson and Robert Louis Stevenson, what are the odds that we get like 5 people's names in a short story, yet 3 of the 5 names are the exact same name over and over, all over the world? In my opinion, that is not possible, that this would happen over and over and over. There is without a doubt in my mind something to these repeating names. And what is with all these dates of construction? I thought we were told that everything in Europe was built hundreds of years ago. That is the narrative that we are told. Yet, these construction dates, all in the 17 and 1800s, are all at the exact same time as all of the construction that is going on over in the USA. Besides for this massive castle that had a story about a 13-month-old baby king. That sounds a lot like a tale if you ask me. It's very interesting that we get palaces in Europe, all over Edinburgh, that look so much older than the buildings in the USA, and so many more of them in such a confined area, literally walking distances, yet they are supposedly built at the exact same time as the ones in the USA, like we've been told today. So let's just keep this in mind as we continue. So then we go over to the assembly rooms, located on 54 George Street, also in Edinburgh. And it's just building after building in this city, where they tell us that the building was designed by a guy named John Henderson. And this guy won a competition in 1781. So we have another contest between all of the master architects of the 1700s. Not only that, but we are also told that Henderson died before the building was done, which we have also seen over and over and over. And you can't leave the fire narrative out of it. When they extend the building in 1818 and William Byrne is chosen. So they didn't burn this one down, but they made sure to throw a burn in there. And of course, the government has taken over this building as well. And I'm just gonna show you all another example of this so that you understand what I'm talking about. And you know it's not just a one-off. When we click on a random castle in Dalmeny, Scotland, and they throw this sentence in here, which overlook the grazings around the mouth of the Cockle Burn. Or we go over to the Bute House, the official residence of the First Minister of Scotland. We're in the middle of this AI-generated story, in my opinion, of course. They throw in this hotel switch-up, where Ullman died in 1826. But the hotel continued to operate under the new ownership of his widow, Mrs. Grace Ullman, where her maiden name is, you guessed it, Burns. The Dalmeny House, where they have commissioned Robert Adam to design a new house. And in 1788, Robert Byrne helped out. They throw this in, where the son of the 3rd Earl, repeating names, and further plans were commissioned in 1805 with 2 more Williams and another Byrne. So we get Robert and William Byrne and 2 Williams, a 3rd Earl, and a 4th Earl. Oh, and of course, another William Wilkins down here. And you can't forget about Robert Adam and Robert Byrne as well. And this is all one paragraph, like we've seen all over the world with these buildings narratives. I'm surprised they didn't throw a 5th Earl in there, just for fun. And the interiors section, that section holds some names for everyone, if you'd like to find those in there yourself. And let's have some fun today. Let's show how insane this all really is. When we stay in Scotland for all of this, we're still in Edinburgh. We have the Kirk of the Canongate, where in 1863, fire damaged the church and probably destroyed the Canon Gates records. Probably. Maybe. But the mainstream narrative is forever unsure when we know that they probably still have these records and we are probably not being shown these records. We can even go to the Craig House, located at Craig House Road, also in Edinburgh, where the original house, we are told, burned down in a fire in 1544 on the dot. They have all of the documents for that. No, the Cuthbert's Church, Edinburgh, which I'm going to tie this whole thing back in, where it is located right next to the hotel that we talked about at the start of this episode, the Caledonian. And we know that that hotel held a fire story in 1890. Well, St. Cuthbert's Church had some conflicts, we are told, where there was a fire set to the church in 1573. And not only did they have this fire, we are also told that in 1689, the church was damaged again by cannon fire from the castle. Now, I was really under the impression that the narrative was that in Europe, these buildings were all constructed in the 1500s or earlier. So it's really interesting to see that they were also, so we are told, being thrown together at the exact same time as the ones in the USA. Yet they are all so incredible and all so close to each other. Whereas in the USA, they are spread out across all the states. So here we have the drum, which we are told had previous houses on the exact same site. And this will be my closing statements for this episode. You are all free to think what you like, as always, but the repetition is overwhelming in my opinion. Once you see the truth, there is no going back. So here we go. In 1584, he commissioned the mason architect to build a new house. The house was built in 1 year, with it being damaged by fire some years later, and again in 1629. But of course, we are told that it was rebuilt each and every time. Hundreds of years ago, no problem at all.